Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. As an island nation, England relied heavily on the sea for trade, fishing and defence, and the Channel and North Sea routes gave it natural access to European commerce. However, England's rise as a global maritime power was the result of several centuries of political, economic, technological and military developments. The foundations were established during the 15th and 16th centuries, where advances in shipbuilding and design like the caravel and galleon, influenced by Liberian models, and the creation of the compass and astrolabe made longer voyages possible. Both Henry VII and Henry VIII invested in shipbuilding, creating the first permanent naval dockyard in Portsmouth and expanding a royal fleet. This gave England a standing naval force rather than relying on the ad hoc ships from merchants. In the age of Elizabeth I, figures such as Francis Drake and John Hawkins harassed Spanish treasure fleets, building English wealth and maritime experience. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 saw England's smaller, more manoeuvrable ships and better naval tactics gave its naval presence further prestige and confidence. Such an English victory was a watershed moment, excuse the pun, marking England's rise and Spain's decline in naval dominance. The founding of companies like the Muscovy Company in 1555 and the East India Company in 1600 also set the stage for overseas trade networks and empire building, which resulted in early settlements in North America and the Caribbean, such as Jamestown in 1607, Barbados and later Jamaica, providing naval bases and economic resources. As successive monarchs, especially under the Stuarts, formalised the navy as a professional fighting force, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, 1652-74, saw England gain dominance in global trade routes and commerce, while the Navigation Acts from 1651 onwards restricted foreign ships in English trade, which further boosted English shipping. With the formation of the Bank of England in 1694, London became a hub for global finance and improvements in shipbuilding and supply chains, rope, sails, gun foundries. This kept the Navy strong, while a permanent admiralty, naval academies and a global network of dockyards allowed Britain to sustain fleets worldwide. By the time we reach victory at Trafalgar in 1805, all these processes ensured Britain's uncontested naval supremacy well into the next century, and it is at this point that we shed light on some of those forgotten heroes which made this victory possible. Those African and ethnic men and women who fought side by side with the British during the Battle of Trafalgar, but also recognised the wider contribution of their role throughout the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815. A series of conflicts between Napoleon Bonaparte and his French Empire against an array of allied powers, which changed over phases of time, but always included Britain. The 21st of October 2025 will mark the 220th anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar. This battle off the coast of Spain between a British fleet, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, against a combined fleet of French and Spanish ships, led by Admiral Villeneuve, saw Britain victorious due to Nelson's superior leadership, training and ability to muster team morale on board his ships. Its historical significance kept Britain safe from French invasion and marked Britain as the superior naval power on a global scale. Nelson and his crew were outnumbered, but they were able to sink 19 enemy ships in 5 hours. Nelson was mortally wounded on his ship, HMS Victory, by a French marksman, and the tragic death and the Battle of Trafalgar became part of a national narrative, inspiring many works of art, such as The Death of Nelson, portraits by Arthur William Dennis and Benjamin West. The victory was commemorated at Trafalgar Square in London in 1844 with a column at its centre. In 1849, bronze reliefs were installed at the base of the columns depicting scenes from the battle. One relief shows the African George Ryan on the far left. What is his story and other Africans like him, and what were the roles they played in this battle? Press ganged off the coasts of America, Africa and the Caribbean, as well as in the East Indies, or enlisted from the African population already resident in Britain. The roles of these men ranged from deckhands to serving as sailors and servants to admirals and officers. The most well-known African sailor to serve as an enslaved and as a free man has to be Olaudah Equiano, 1745 to 1797, who has written extensively about his life as a sailor and incidentally encountered a 14-year-old Horatio Nelson on board the HMS Racehorse back in 1773. This ship, along with another ship, HMS Carcass, were both due to depart for an expedition to the Arctic in search of a passage to the east. Unfortunately, the expedition had to be abandoned due to both ships becoming trapped in ice. It is difficult to identify in most cases who these Africans and sailors of other ethnicities were. Why was this? The problem was the inconsistent record keeping of logbooks on board many of the ships. The Royal Navy did not differentiate between Africans and Indians, often referring to them as black or coloured. On the ship which Nelson directly commanded, the HMS Victory, 22 ethnicities were recorded in its logbook, showing that around a third was ethnic or non-British. HMS Victory also had the worst fatality of any of the British ships, with 57 deaths and 102 wounded. However, other sources, such as portraits and family records, were used for identification. The logbooks also identified the nationalities of many foreign Europeans. There were Italians, Germans, Maltese, Norwegians, Russian, Brazilian, and even a handful of French volunteers. Looking at this from another perspective, the fact that a significant proportion of the crew were from a diverse range of backgrounds and nationalities reveals the British Royal Navy as a major equal opportunities employer, and viewed the idea of diversity of their crew as not just the norm, but also as a possible advantage over their opponent. This may have been something unique and way ahead of its time. Was this diversity something that the Royal Navy, and indeed Nelson, may have been particularly proud of? However, you have to wonder whether a Frenchman fighting for the opposition towards his own country might be hesitant about this and feel a sense of betrayal. But if you were being paid to carry out a job which was dependent on life and death, as well as victory or defeat, as the outcome, then it would be the camaraderie that unified these men rather than their race or nationality that divided them. And despite this, the records of logbooks that are in existence indicate that it was rare to non-existent to have an African rise above the rank of an ordinary seaman, but they were all on the payroll and received payment and possibly their freedom. Some of the most reliable sources were parish records, and possibly the most significant resource was the record of the black pensioners at Greenwich Hospital, which kept a record of retired sailors between 1692 and 1869. These records show the age, date of birth, length of service and service details of the ship's name on which they served, the type of injury sustained, as well as place of residence and marital status. 20,000 pensioners were interred at Greenwich Naval Hospital, Old Burial Ground. When the hospital closed in 1875, their remains were moved to East Pleasance Park in East Greenwich, with a memorial built on the original burial ground. On the 21st of October 2025, how will we remember the Battle of Trafalgar? Will the kind of power and strength that comes from the unity of diversity and the impact of its power for good be forgotten? With the ever-changing current global context, how can one memorialise a battle that prevented the further invasion and threat of colonisation from an aspiring emperor and dictator? Faced with a similar crisis 220 years later, can Britain, along with its allies, take the lessons from history to take the necessary action to prevent history from repeating itself? If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform, click the subscribe button and check out my other episodes related to this one, such as The Victory Behind Horatio Nelson from Season 1 and Unpicking the Identity Parade, The Problem with Trafalgar from the second season. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884 and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in paperback, on Amazon in Kindle format and in ebook format at Apple Books and all other digital platforms. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. If you'd also like to find out more about my current publications, you can also listen to the Stories So Far podcasts, parts 1 to 6, across the first, second and third seasons of the podcast series, where I give readings and share anecdotes about the background to these stories. And if you'd like to sign up to my email list, just visit the website where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own, because history is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next page.